There you go. Good job. Yeah, let's go.
Hi all,
Let's.
welcome back to our book club for analyzing baseball data with R. We are now up to a newer chapter in the new edition, I believe, where it's titled Making a Scientific Presentation in Quarto. I myself have been using Quarto for a while now for the sake of making blog posts and such, and that's why I'm actually going to go through here. What I decided to do is to tell a story, which is what the textbook authors recommended. And I'll show you the blog post side of things. And as you can see on the left side of the screen, I'll show you and point out some of the Quarto code along the way. So first off, what we mean by some of the Quarto code, up front, we have some metadata. You could see the title, the blog post, the author's name, the date, which if you're publishing blog posts, you probably want to keep that in order. This stuff here I'll mention at the end makes the slideshow, but for personal preference, I actually like to make blog posts, which are essentially HTML web pages. And I want to double check that table of contents is true. That's on the right side of the screen. When I make lecture slides for my students, I want this in a system that allows them to go back and forth in the lecture slides pretty quickly. And for my colleagues here in the book club, let me go ahead and post a URL in the chat as well. All right, so for the narrative, let me zoom in a bit. I want to apply our new skills to a particular half inning that is cherished in my memories. In particular, I want to see if I could find a at bat by Andre Ethier where he faced Brad Lidge in the bottom of the ninth inning. Part of the reason why this is a cherished memory for me is because I took a couple of friends that I had met in grad school, and I took them to this game, which was their first Dodger game. And I'll mention more about the players and the teams as we go along. Along the way, we'll be looking at the Lawman data set, the retro sheet package in particular, and then using our tidyverse skills. When I was forming this blog post, I thought at first I was going to actually do this as a review session, going through the previous, I think, 11 chapters of material, but it wasn't quite the way things worked out. Nevertheless, where we started in chapter one was going through the data sets. The Norman data sets could help us find information through its tables, such as people batting, pitching, fielding, and teams. And what I wanted to do at first is find some players in particular, Andre Ethier, Lidge, Brad Lidge, and Jason Worth. From the people package, we could use our deep player skills and find those players. In particular, I needed to keep track of the player IDs. There was only one person, last name Ethier, one person, last name Lidge, but two people named Worth, but I imagine it was the one born closer to us. And you see some of the other information thereof. Now, on the Quarto side of things, it's no easier to see on the right-hand side with the table of contents. I have a section here called data sets and a subsection here called Lawman. In order to do the sections, we have a first level header and then a second level header. And the nice thing is in this Quarto markdown language, making these section headers is very easy in its syntax. I've actually already zoomed by some of the other syntactical features, so let me go back to them. When we want to insert an image, into the blog post or what have you, the syntax is exclamation point and then the file name of the image inside parentheses. And then if you want some alternate text or caption text, a quick way to do that is to also include the square brackets beforehand, which might be useful for accessibility reasons, or if your web page just happens to load slowly, doesn't load the pictures, at least you know what was supposed to be there. Now, one of my favorite features of Quarto is making arrangements such as side-by-side columns. So you'll notice that in order to start making columns, you need, in this case, four colons and this descriptor. And these are before and after, so you need four colons at the end. Technically, the number of colons themselves don't matter too much, but it's probably a good idea to just be consistent. Nested inside the column environment, I have a different number of colons for each column. So that is to say, I just need to make sure this 3 is different than 4 colons. It's probably not necessarily required, but it's a good idea to, compared to the text width, describe how far across the columns go. So for the column with Brad Lidge's picture, I have it going 45% across, and likewise for the column with Andre Ethier's picture. I recommend keeping a third column in between with some non-zero percentage. That way the pictures or the text do not collide with each other. So once again, the main thing is just to be very careful with the number of colons and make it sure it's consistent for whatever before and after setting that you have. Or the more technical term, especially once you start to consider the underlying CSS cascading style sheets, the technical term is that these are fenced divs. Fenced divs of DIVs. But while we're here, do you have any more questions about some of the Quarto syntax that we saw so far?
So that's just a special Quarto thing, the fence divs, or does it come from some other thing? Do you know? And just like for example, does two colons mean anything, or why is it four colons? It seems completely arbitrary to me.
Yes, it is somewhat arbitrary. These are just markdown shortcuts that make it a lot easier to invoke the underlying CSS.
Okay,
And to the best of my knowledge, the reason why we say fence divs is because that is coming from CSS.
okay, thank you.
So then, now having the 3 player IDs, Andre Acier, Brad Lidge, Jason Worth, we could find these players. And I thought of practicing this with the batting, pitching, and fielding lawman tables in particular. So for Andre Ethier, from the batting table, we have this information. And it reminds me that Ethier played from 2006, 2017. From the pitching table, we have this information about Brad Lidge. Reminded me that he played from 2002 to 2012. And from the fielding table, we have this information about Jason Worth. Reminded me that he played from 2002 to 2017. Ethier was a lifetime Dodger at the professional level, at the majors. Lidge was famous for his time with the Astros and Phillies and ended the season with the Nationals. Worth was a prospect with the Blue Jays and Dodgers until an A.J. Burnett fastball, of all things, became prominent in his play with the Phillies and was a mainstay with the rebuilding Nationals during those years. Now, you'll notice that I like to arrange information in what's called a tab set. Allows the viewer to quickly switch between these tables. So let's look at the Quarto syntax there. For the panel tab set, we once again want to have the mentality of starting and ending the environment. I like to go with 5 colons, if nothing else, just to have something mentally different than the 4 colons that I use with the columns. Which, by the way, allows me to use panels and columns together if I want to. I also gave this a level 3 header, and I'll do the same for pitching and fielding. Like R Markdown, we could quickly bring in R code that is fully executable, assuming no bugs. Tell the software that we are using the R language. You could also tell it to use Python and maybe some other languages thereof. And this code will run unless otherwise indicated when we compile the document. When you are inside a panel tab set, as you can see, comparing the left and right hand sides of the screen, in order to make the new tab, the new subset environment, you use the same, in this case, level 3 header. And that's how I got the 3 tabs for the batting, pitching, and fielding. If you are interested in making Quarto blog posts, documents, reports, or slideshows fairly often, my workflow environment, at least what works for me, is to keep stencils of these, um, say like the columns and the panel tab sets, just keep them around somewhere. These are just otherwise empty. And that way, whenever I want a column environment, I copy and paste it back to wherever I need it. And likewise for the panel tab set. I grew up with textbooks, and I like the textbooks that actually had kind of like side thoughts, information, additional information. And one of the CSS environments that Quarto offers its developers or users pretty quickly is what's called a call-out box. A call-out box, as you can see, will give it a color, a symbol in the top left corner, and you could use it to just highlight or otherwise uh, demarcate a certain bit of information. Here, I simply copy and pasted the introductory paragraphs about Brad Lidge and Andre Ethier, respectively, from their Wikipedia pages. Looking at the code, I like to use 3 colons with a callout box, simply because 3 colons is different from my 4 colons for columns and 5 colons for panel tab sets. You'll notice that on the top right, one call box happens to have a default red color. Bottom right, a call box has a default blue color. You could have different themes of the call out boxes. I'm just using the defaults today because, to be honest, that's what I know how to do. If you give it the warning theme after invoking the call out descriptor, that's what makes it the red and puts the exclamation point triangle, the hazard symbol, in this case, left of the word Spratledge. The title of the call-out box, you could see I've given it a level 2 header. The header at this point doesn't actually change the size, the font size of what's inside the call-out box title. I'm just saying that this header is different from the regular text. Oh, and I should mention in Quarto, in order to make a link, such as when I have the Wikipedia link, it goes in like the images, it goes in the regular parentheses, and the label for the link goes in the square brackets. Very convenient and simple markup language. Otherwise, just be careful when you're programming this markup language, or is it markdown? Might be markdown. When you're doing the markdown language, make sure that for every opening you have a closing to complete the fence div. All right, moving along with the narrative, I was pretty sure that Brad Lidge was pitching for the Phillies that day that I'm looking for. So I'm just going to focus on the seasons where Brad Lidge was on the Phillies. We looked at that above. And overall, I wanted to try out and get to know the retro sheet package and see what is available to us, our programmers. But just out of curiosity, I decided to not use the additional functions that we've been seeing from the Baseball R package or the other package specifically for this textbook. So again, I'm using the retro sheet package directly, but not necessarily the way the textbook said. We could bring in information for a whole season by using the get retro sheet function from the retro sheet package, game parameter, and then plug in the year, as you can see. On a quick aside, I thought about going through the StatCast data as well, and the textbook does talk about this for a bit, so let's mention this. Compared to the Lawman and RetroSheet data sets, the StatCast might be using a different set of player identifications called the Chadwick IDs. Now, this is direct code directly from the textbook. Otherwise, I filtered it for the three players I had in mind at the moment. And using the textbook's baseball R package, you could quickly get an entire data file of the Chadwick IDs. But just for the sake of practicality, I decided to not leave that here with us because it's about 150 megabytes, and I did not want to leave that in our GitHub repo. So what I did was I briefly looked at the Chadwick IDs for just these three players and certain columns, and I saved that around in our GitHub repo for something that's much more manageable in size. In particular, the Chadwick IDs, unlike the letters that we've seen before, these are all numeric. Now, you'll notice with the callout box here, the one that's titled Optional Obtaining Chadwick IDs, this one's a bit slightly more functional, and this is what's called a collapsible callout box. You could click this arrow on the right-hand side or anywhere on the title bar, and it allows the viewer to show or hide the contents. I like this as well. And in order to make it collapsible, you give this an additional attribute saying that collapse equals true. Unlike the warning or note themes for the call boxes above, this one has a tip theme, which by default has a green color and produces this light bulb, which feels like the textbooks we've had in the past. Like our Markdown, for our code, if you don't want the code to run, you just want to show, set the code chunk parameters accordingly, such as eval equals false. So that is to say, after trying this once, I did not need the code to download a 150 megabyte file a second time. That's actually most of the Quarto stuff. Let me pause here and see if there are any more questions from the folks in the book club.
Uh, just noticing, Derek, that that's one of the challenges that I had when I was playing with the different databases, the Llama, the RetroSheet, the StatCast, that there's no uniform convention on the ID of the players. So sometimes what I did was take a note in terms of where I can find from the Llama where I can find that ID, in the retro sheet where I can find it. And there is a spreadsheet. I download a spreadsheet. Maybe I'll post it. That it has like a cross reference, okay, of different systems and the player and which is the ID for each of the data systems. Because sometimes it gets confusing, and you can get frustrated, using the ID, thinking that the ID corresponds to that data set, and it's not. Okay, so that's one of the skills that you have to develop when working with these baseball data sets.
Oh, indeed, I agree with you. We're thinking
Yeah.
about things like merging data sets on the common columns or keys. And like I imagine any data set manager has to keep those
Right.
identification columns around. Right.
Definitely. I'll post it later. I have to find it, but I'll post it later. The the cross reference, which will come handy. Believe me, it will come handy. When you're working with the different data sets. Trying to follow the same player history.
Awesome. Looking forward to that.
Yep. Yep.
Back to the narrative. First level header, now talking about matchups. Second level header, going back to retro sheet. Again, I was thinking about running this as a review session, so now I was thinking, oh, let's go into chapter 2, talking about tidyverse and stuff. We could filter the 5 seasons down to when the visiting team was Philadelphia and the home team was a National League Los Angeles Dodgers. And then just for the sake of brevity, looking at these columns here. And for those 4 seasons where Brad Lidge was a Philly, on the Phillies, the Phillies visited Los Angeles in Los Angeles on these dates. What I found curious is in 2008, it was a 4-game series. 2009 was a 4-game series, but then the next 2 seasons was back to the normal 3-game series. Of course, I know how this ends, so I could filter this a little bit more from here, but I'll get to that. I was really hoping to then have even more granularity to talk about the pictures that Lidge threw. So I started to go through the StatCast search. Admittedly, at this point, I went back to the baseball R package for their helper functions. Put in, started to look for certain dates and such. But oops, I forgot that StatCast only goes back 2015. So I'll admit my mistake there and just kind of continue on and put my little oopsie inside a warning call-out block. On a perhaps more positive tone, I put in a tip block. By the way, why am I already skipping to June 5th, 2009? Honestly, at this point, you didn't want to see me do a huge filter through these 14 games one way or the other. I'll just say, just state the obvious. I knew how the game ended. I did a couple Google searches. Fortunately, there was a lot of information on the baseball reference page for that very game. So that was pretty useful. And then just to skip ahead in the story a bit, I'll just filter to that date. In particular, you could use the Get Retro Sheet package to look at the schedule of games for a certain season, one season at a time. So I'll focus on the games that took place that day, June 5th, 2009. One thing I want to point out while I'm here is that, different teams have different days off. So, for example, when the Phillies faced the Dodgers that day, this was only game number 55 for the Phillies, but game 57 for the Dodgers. Also, on kind of a morbid note, the last column of this schedule acquisition is whether or not the games were postponed or made up. Most of the time, the notes for this is that the makeup games, or in the case of rainouts, and the games lead to a doubleheader or something. Of interest, one of the more unusual notes is that I think this was the year that Angels pitcher Nick Aidenhart tragically died, so that it does get noted in that particular Angels game. All right, so for the narrative, I wanted to talk about why we Dodgers fans cared about the Phillies. So again, the game took place in 2009. Let me go back to the previous season. Going back to the previous season is pretty easy. I'll just use the Lawman data set, 2008. For the sake of brevity, focus on the National League, these columns. And I'll focus on the teams that finished with a winning record. The Cubs had the most wins that year, previous year, 2008, followed by the Phillies, the Brewers. And by the way, the Dodgers won the NL West with only 84 wins. That was actually kind of a poor showing by the NL West. Now, I believe at the time, for the division series, you were not allowed to face off with your own division opponent. So even if that were the consideration, the Cubs were not allowed to face the Brewers in the first round of the playoffs. So what happens is then the Cubs face the team with the lowest record, lowest amount of wins instead. Surprisingly, the underdog Dodgers beat the 97-win Cubs in the division series and advanced to the championship series, NLCS. Likewise, the Phillies beat the Brewers. So that takes care of some of these yeses here. In the championship series, the Phillies beat the Dodgers 4-1, and then moves on to the World Series where they beat the Tampa Bay Rays in the 2008 World Series. In case you're curious, I did double check that. I believe it is the Tampa Bay Rays, not the Devil Rays, as in the Tampa Bay team had already changed their name by that point. So when my friends and I saw the Dodgers that day, and the visiting team were the Phillies, it was an important game for Dodgers fans because we were welcoming in the World Series, recent World Series champion Philadelphia Phillies. So I wanted to do something somewhat similar for the 2009 season, talk about the standings. But going from the retro sheet data was, in my opinion, a little bit more difficult. I wanted to get the sense of the standings for each particular day of the season. But in the retro sheet data, first of all, I had to figure out who won each game in the first place. So did the visiting team have more runs than the home team? From there, I did a couple of, in my opinion, clever calculations with the help of Stack Overflow to get to have a cumulative number of wins. And here on the vertical is number of wins, on the horizontal is the date of the season. And this is going from the beginning of the season to that particular day, June 5th. I was surprised to see that now what happened in 2009 is that the Dodgers retool got a few free agents, re-signed a few free agents. By the way, for Dodgers fans, included the era of Manny Wood, Manny Ramirez, and some other players that we'll highlight in a bit. So in 2009, after the somewhat embarrassing playoff loss to the Phillies the previous season, the Dodgers got off to a pretty quick start. And as you can see in the thick blue line, actually had the most number of wins in the league for a while. Of the gray lines are the other 28 teams. The Philadelphia Phillies, I was surprised to see, actually got off to kind of a slump or a slow start in their year after winning the World Series. So they were actually a 500 team for a while. And this actually conflicted with my memories because, again, we, the Dodgers fans, felt like the underdog welcoming in the World Series winners. But at the time of this particular game, the Dodgers actually had more wins than the Phillies. What I'd like to do with my students is if I present a code, I don't necessarily want to bog this down with the if I present a plot, I don't necessarily want to bog this down with a bunch of code. If the students want the code later, they could just click the tab set and I'll present the code that way. The way I do that is, let me see if I could just jump there. For the first tab that says plot, I set the code chunk options. Oh, I noticed I remember to do this Quarto style. I set the code chunk options echo false eval true this time. And this is after I verified that the code works. And then in the tab for code, I just switched them echo true eval false. So I'm actually copy and pasting the entire code chunk, just simply switching the code chunk options. Now,
Hey, I had a question about that too.
yes.
Is it just a Quarto thing to use the hash bang syntax? I mean, I'm used to the knitter thing where you put R comma echo equals false or whatever, and that type of thing. Yeah, that seems to still work with Quarto, and I do it out of habit. But I probably should switch to this other method, the hash bang method.
Yes, I agree with you. It's taken me a while to switch to the newer Quarto syntax. Obviously, we saw that it's backwards compatible for a bit. I think it's a good idea to switch to especially if you do plan to use Quarto, to switch to the new syntax because it's a little bit more color coordinated. It's a little more streamlined, and Quarto might offer you more code chunk options as well.
All right, cool. Maybe at the end of this, if you have time, if we still have time, if you could just you seem to be really quite skilled with Quarto. I wonder if you would had any pointers on what else one could go off and use to try to master Quarto as well. I use it a lot. I really do. And the problem is I kind of use a subset that I know how to use kind of bad. I use Quarto badly. I abuse Quarto. So at the end, if you could just maybe some point. I don't know if it was a good book or a good website or tutorial somewhere to really to hammer that Quarto language down, or not language, but style.
Yeah, so addressing a couple of the ideas you brought up, I think the only other thing we do inside the original curly braces at the top, and I skipped this in my own programming, it's still a good idea to give each code block a name so that way if
Right.
you're debugging later, you could find it. Um, Otherwise, for Quarto, unfortunately, I don't think enough people adopted it to create a nice ecosystem of tutorials. The Some of the R folks that you might have heard of, such as Dr. Mine Setakaita Rundell and other educators, they used to have a blog post called like Quarto Tip of the Day.
Oh,
Unfortunately, that only lasted for about half a month.
oh. Ran out of it. Should have done a Quarto tip of the week and they would have lasted longer.
Yeah, but as you can imagine, as I was doing this, I just frequently Google search, hey, how do I do blank in Quarto, and hope that someone has done this so far.
Okay. Okay, that's I mean, I guess what I should just do is uh stretch my legs a little bit, try to do things I haven't done before, rather than just a few things I know how to do. Like I
Yep.
didn't even do about that two column thing. I'm like, oh, that's how that works. Okay.
Right, and this is why I've been pushing the host of the data science learning community to push to go to Quarto in the first place, because I love the two columns and I love the panel tab sets. But whether or not that's useful for the book clubs, that's debatable.
I thought the plan was to switch over to Quarto, but it's just been a little slow going.
Yes, we actually did use Quarto in the generative AI book club, but it was kind of a rough transition.
All right, cool. Thanks, man.
Mhm. On the data viz side of things, you'll notice that when I made this ggplot, that I've actually got rid of the legend. I like this style of color coding with the title or the descriptors themselves, namely the red words that say Philadelphia Phillies and the blue words that say Los Angeles Dodgers. This is not specifically a Quarto thing. This is aided by the GG text package. But you'll notice in order to get the colored words or fonts, I use the CSS directly. All right. So now with the particular game in mind, in order to get play-by-play data from the RetroSheet package, instead of game or schedule, you plug in play here, you plug in a season, and now the package authors did not want you to get play-by-play for 162 games times 15 home teams. So they want you to also plug in the home team as well. So this information will be stored into a variable called Dodgers 2009, and I had to be very careful here to understand the data format. I double checked the length of this, and it's 81 home games, which you'll notice is different from 162. Or in particular, 81 is different from 162. I had to quickly realize that I only have information in the point of view the home team, which makes sense because if you want the information about the away team, you just need the other half of the data, which will come along the way. And what might be annoying to programmers like me who are just very used to data frames is that at first this data is in a list. Looking at the first item of the list, we see information about the Dodgers on April 13th of that season, version control, some meta information about the game, the starting lineups for the game, usually the batters, the play-by-play, which is what we'll focus on here, you'll notice is two-dimensional. I forgot what this is. Substitute players such as pinch hitters. And this is kind of an annoying organization in my opinion, but this dates back many years when we needed memory efficiency. So this had to be very succinct. And some other data as well. So once again, the overall is this is in a list, and we have to, if we want to get more information thereof, we have to invoke these individual attributes, which they themselves might have different sizes. So this does not play well if you're like me and you have a data frame mindset. I, at this point, had just Googled the game directly. I knew exactly what the date was. I made myself a quick for loop to find out which home game this was. It was home game number 28. So I'm going to focus on home game number 28 by invoking that element of the list. And then finally, to get myself into a nice data frame format so I could go back to dplyr and stuff, invoke the play-by-play attribute of this list item and convert it to a data frame. All right. With that, just some more straightforward dplyr, and we'll finish off the narrative here. First inning of the game. You want information about the first inning? Filter it as such. In the first inning, we saw some luminary players come up to bat, such as Jimmy Rollins, Chase Utley, Jason Worth. I don't have all these symbols for the scorekeeper's stuff memorized, but I believe at this point there were base runners on first and second, or at least two base runners on. It's not obvious here, but the Dodgers pitcher at the moment was Eric Milton, who I believe played most of his years with Minnesota Twins. The Dodgers at this point had a very veteran-laden team. So at this point, Eric Milton was struggling a little bit at the beginning of the game. Two base runners amongst their first three. But then Ryan Howard struck out. And then Raul Ibanez grounded to second. In the bottom half of the inning, so notice in the team column, the top half is team equals 0. In the bottom half of the inning, team equals 1. In the bottom half of the inning, sent up Juan Pierre, who, because these are keeping track of play-by-plays, which for call at bat, Juan Pierre stole a base, or something thereof, because in the next play, I believe there was a double play. And then Orlando Hudson flied out to right. What I was hoping to do next is to, rather than do this for every inning, of course, focus on the run scoring plays. Honestly, I briefly thought all I would have to do is search for the letter R, capital R, in the play column. But comparing that to the other box score I had on me, that was not the case. Long story short, if you're dealing with the retro sheet data, there are code wrappers or apps or whatever that might help you parse the information. I'm using the retro sheet data retro sheet package directly, so I did not use those helper wrappers. So anyways, if I search for just the letter R, it's only going to give me this particular Chase Utley play. But for the sake of the narrative, let me describe the other ones. The descriptions at the bottom of the screen. In the top of the third, Raul Ibanez had an RBI ground out, but there was a runner on, so that was an RBI ground out. It's now a score of Philly 1, Dodgers 0. In the top of the fourth was 2 runners on. Chase Utley hit a 2 RBI double. So that's expressed in a lot of this information here by the scorekeeper. Phillies 3, Dodgers 0. And in the bottom of the fourth, Orlando Hudson had an RBI ground out. Phillies 3, Dodgers 1. And in the bottom of the seventh, James Loney had an RBI single. Phillies 3, Dodgers 2. So that is to say, after Eric Milton might have had a slow start to the game, otherwise the pitchers did pretty well. It was kind of a pitcher's duel. The Phillies pitcher, by the way, was Jamie Moyer, which might not be obvious from the retro sheet data. So back to my narrative, it's after the bottom of the seventh, the Dodgers are behind, and my friends, where I had taken them to their first Dodger game, they were just kind of bummed out. They were big Dodgers fans, don't want to see to lose to the Phillies of all people, the team that knocked us out of the playoffs last year. So I just turn to my friends and I give them the trope. Hey, look, guys, it's Hollywood. Something magical is going to happen here. So let's bring us to the bottom of the ninth. Bottom of the ninth, filter, ninth inning, and then home team. With a save situation, Philadelphia sent their closer, Brad Lidge, to the mound to face, I forgot to fix this word, face the heart of the Dodger lineup. Number 2 in the batting order is Rafael Foucault. And I just, at this point, use the string detect function from the string R package to quickly find the players. Looking at the scorekeeper stuff, I'm not quite sure what this non-play was, so that was curious. That also got carried over here. 2 called strikes, quick strikes on Foucault from Lidge. Maybe just a ball just to see if Foucault was being too antsy. So this is at this point a 1-2 count, one ball, 2 strikes. Lidge and the catcher decided to just try to chase the edges. Foucault worked a full count, but then got called out on strikes at the end of this at bat. 1 out for the Phillies. Number 3 batter in the Dodger lineup that day, Orlando Hudson. Called strike, ball, called strike. Lidge had another 1-2 count. And then Hudson grounded out to the pitcher. I probably should have mentioned this earlier in case anybody's watching the video. The defense players are numbered. Pitcher 1, catcher 2, first baseman 3, second baseman 4, I believe shortstop's 5, third baseman 6, left field's 7, center field's 8, right fielder's 9. So if I'm reading this scorekeeper correctly, the ball went to the pitcher first, and then he tossed it over to the first baseman. So that's why I'm saying it grounded out. Thank you. 6 is shortstop. All right. So, anyways, Rafael Furcal struck out. Orlando Hudson ground out to the pitcher. Very not dramatic. 2 outs for the Phillies. Casey Blake, who I guess was hitting cleanup at that day. Called strike, ball, swing and strike. Yet another 1-2 count. But Casey Blake singled to left field. So, hey, run on first. There's something. For the next batter, we called him Big James Loney, one of our star prospects for a while. You'll notice that the pitch sequence is actually quite complicated here. Let me walk us through that one. Called strike, ball, swinging strike blocked by the catcher. I believe that's what the asterisk means. Ball, foul blocked by the catcher. There was a bit more activity on the next ball, which I believe in this context mean that Blake faked a steal attempt to second, but probably did not actually run all the way. And this was yet another 1-2 count. Lidge and the catcher decided to be cautious with James Loney, who had an RBI early in the game, and compared to maybe the rest of the Dodger lineup, this is probably the batter you wanted to be cautious with. So Loney worked a walk. This is the number 5 hitter, so maybe I should not have called him cleanup. So hey, runners on first and second for the Dodgers now. Russell Martin, strike, blocked by catcher, ball, called strike. Yet another 1-2 count by Lidge. Russell Martin just hits a squibber, a light effort, goes to the third baseman, and there's an error by third baseman Pedro Feliz. Told you it was Hollywood. Now the bases are loaded. Bottom of the 9th. Very next inning, first pitch, Andre Ethier hits the ball down the right field line. Official scorer calls it a double, 2 RBIs, walk-off victory, and the Dodgers won the game. Anywho, I was curious how the rest of the season went, just for my memories. Here's the extension of the graph I presented before to the end of the season. Notice that where the blue and red lines ended up towards the right, ended up being that the Dodgers had the most wins in the National League. The Phillies ended up second after a torrid summer and catching back up. The other 28 teams, once again, on the gray lines. Over in the American League, the teams that had more wins than the Dodgers and Phillies might surprise you. The Yankees might not surprise you, but the second place team in the American League were the Angels. They actually caught up to the big dogs as well. Looking at what happened in the playoffs that year for the National League, and again, just focusing on the teams with the winning records, the Dodgers had the most wins in the National League in 2009, followed by the Phillies, who had caught up. Now, the top team, the Dodgers, are not allowed to face the team in their own division, I believe, at the time. So the Dodgers faced the Cardinals in the division series and won the division series. The Phillies, for their efforts, defeated the Rockies, the so-called Rocktober, and also advanced to the division series. Much to the chagrin of Dodgers fans, deja vu, the Phillies defeated the Dodgers in the championship series 4-1 again. That was not a fun time. However, this time the Phillies would not win the World Series because that was the year that they ran into the 2009 Yankees. One more thing I should mention about the Quarto stuff. You notice I made the blog post with all this Quarto code. I prefer blog posts because it's less restrictive for me for in terms of things like visual space. But if you want to make a slideshow, the way to do that is back up here with the markup. You want to have the format to be reveal JavaScript. And then let's see if this renders. Give it a few seconds. And when you do reveal JavaScript, this should make a slideshow. Still running, sorry. I'll just go ahead and mention here, if you wanted to, the format doesn't have to be JavaScript directly. You could also make Beamer style presentations if you're used to the old math and LaTeX, or you could even put in PowerPoint directly here. However, if you're concerned about compatibility and sharing your slides, all you'd have to do is save your file as a PDF anyways. So in the bottom right, I could just click through or press the right-hand button. It will run through this as a slideshow. Some of the Quarto features such as tab set and columns still work. However, I find that these slides run out of space pretty quickly. So you could put in some other parameters as well. You could make scroll bars for these extra large slides. This might take a bit to render. So that way, if someone had access to the slides, they could scroll up and down the slides. But then the counter argument is that if you have that much information on the slides, you should have just been more succinct in the first place. I should have been more succinct. Also, for the slides, I probably did not need the table of contents, so I could set table of contents to false. And then finally, for the slides, this is the generic default settings. There are a few different themes which you might have also explored when talking about things like making a website in R. I'm going to show off the league theme since this is the baseball book club. I thought that was apropos. Give this a few seconds to render. Note in the chat that for the Dodgers, at least for 2008, I believe they only sent one All-Star because before going to the playoffs, the Dodgers actually had a pretty slow start that year. Anyways, now the slideshow is in the league theme. Personally, I do not like it. The font is a bit harder for me to read. But hey, for changing one line of code, this is arguably much more professional. And this is what it looks like. And that, folks, will bring us to the end of today's session. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Yeah, cool. I mean, I really
Very
learned a
nice,
lot
very
of
nice.
I learned a
Really
lot
good.
of Quarto things and some baseball things too, but especially the Quarto I appreciate. So that was awesome. I mean, you really do know your Quarto. I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Any questions from you all?
I think I just threw my questions in as I needed them during the thing, so I'm pretty clear, I think. And I think next week we have the last chapter, another interesting topic in R, using Shiny with baseball.
Shiny.
So that'll be Trevin.